The wind whispered through the pine trees like a warning, rustling the branches in the thick Arkansas woods. The old pickup truck rumbled down a dirt road barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Its headlights cut through the foggy dusk, flickering. Now and then, like the truck itself was hesitating, in the passenger seat sat Harper, a 7-year-old girl with wide blue eyes and tangled brown hair tied in a sagging ponytail. She clutched her small pink backpack like it was the last familiar thing left in the world. She didn't ask where they were going. She had learned not to ask too many questions around her father. Dale kept his hands tight on the steering wheel, eyes locked forward. He hadn't spoken since they left town. His silence was heavy, like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Harper looked at him once. His jaw was clenched, his face pale, unshaven, and hard. Her stomach turned. Something felt wrong. The truck stopped, abruptly near a cluster of trees. "Out," he muttered, opening the door. Harper obeyed, stepping down into the muddy earth. The cold air bit through her thin jacket. Her shoes sank slightly in the wet ground. She watched as Dale pulled a folded blanket and a water bottle from behind the seat and handed them to her. "Sit here," he said, walking a few paces away from the truck. He spread the blanket under an oak tree. "I'll be back soon." "Just wait. Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. He didn't answer. He turned, walked back to the truck, got in, and drove off without looking back. The sound of the engine faded fast, swallowed by the trees. Harper stood still, confused. She stared down the road long after the red taillights had vanished. Her breath fogged in the air. She looked around. It was too quiet. She sat on the blanket, hugging her backpack and trying not to cry. Minutes passed. Then hours. The sky darkened to pitch black. Stars blinked through the canopy above. Night animals, stirred owls, insects, something larger in the distance. Harper shivered. She called out. "Daddy?" Silence. She said it again, louder. "Daddy?" Still. Nothing. The tears came then, hot and fast. She buried her face in her knees and sobbed into the night. That's when she heard it, a crunch of leaves, something moving through the trees. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Another rustle. Closer this time. She turned her head slowly. Out from the dark stepped a large, lean dog. Its fur was dirty, patched, and mottled with old scars. One ear was torn. Its ribs showed through its coat, but those eyes were calm, golden, and alert. It didn't growl or bark. It just looked at her. Harper didn't move. The dog sniffed the air, then sat down 10 feet away. Watching. She wiped her nose. "Are you lost too?" she whispered. The dog tilted its head. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a broken granola bar. She held it out slowly, hand trembling. The dog approached, sniffed it, and took it gently from her fingers. Then it laid down beside her, just far enough to show it meant no harm, but close enough to protect. Harper whispered, "I'm going to call you Shadow." The dog's tail wagged. Once. The wind picked up again, but Harper didn't feel as scared anymore. She curled up on the blanket, and Shadow lay facing the woods, ears up, nose twitching at every sound. That night, under 1,000 stars, in the middle of nowhere, a little girl was forgotten by the world, but not by the one soul who refused to leave her behind. Shadow had found her, and he wasn't going anywhere. By morning, the forest had changed. The eerie silence of the night was replaced with the chirping of birds and the distant rustle of squirrels darting through trees. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy above, casting golden beams across the damp forest floor. Harper stirred. Beneath the thin blanket, her arms wrapped around her small backpack like it could shield her from the world. Shadow was still there. He sat beside her, alert, watching the tree line. His body was still, but his ears twitched at every sound. When Harper sat up, his tail wagged gently against the ground. He didn't bark, didn't jump, just waited like he had always belonged there beside her. Harper's stomach growled. She pulled out the second half of her broken granola bar and looked at it like it was treasure. She broke off a tiny piece for herself and held the rest out for Shadow. He took it politely, licking her fingers once in thanks before lying back down beside her. For the first time in her life, Harper didn't feel completely alone. The day passed slowly. Harper stayed near the tree, unsure what direction to go or what might be waiting beyond the thick woods. Every time she tried to wander off the trail, Shadow gently blocked her path with his body. He nudged her back toward the blanket, as if saying, "Not safe that way." The sun crept across the sky, then began its descent. Harper tried not to cry, but fear bubbled in her chest like hot water. She missed school, missed her teacher, her warm bed, cartoons, and mac and cheese. Most of all, she missed the version of her father who used to tell her bedtime stories before he started drinking, before he stopped noticing her Dot. Now he was just Dot, gone Dot. Shadow seemed to sense her sadness. He nudged her with his nose and dropped something at her feet, a fast food burger wrapper. She blinked at it, confused. Shadow backed up and sat down again, proud. It wasn't much, just a corner of bun and some meat still clinging to the wrapper, but it was something. He had gone out and brought food for her. Harper tore it carefully, splitting the scraps between them. They ate in silence, side by side. When they were done, she leaned against him and whispered, "You're the only one who stayed." That night was colder. Harper shivered under the blanket, teeth chattering, but Shadow pressed close to her side, sharing his body heat. Whenever he heard something in the distance, a twig snap, an owl hoot, he lifted his head, sniffed the air, and stayed perfectly still until it passed. Harper found comfort in his presence. She laid her hand on his back, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing. He didn't speak, didn't promise anything, but his loyalty spoke louder than words. By the third day, Harper's voice was hoarse, and she was growing weak. The last of her snacks were gone, and her water bottle had only a few sips left. Still, she trusted Shadow more than anything. That morning, as she sat against a tree trunk drawing in a small notebook, she'd packed stick figures of her and Shadow beneath a bright yellow sun. He suddenly stood and pricked up his ears. Then he trotted away. Harper's heart sank. "No," she croaked. "Don't leave me too." But Shadow paused halfway down the path and looked back. He barked once, sharply, then took a few more steps, stopping again to look at her. Harper wiped her eyes. Was he trying to lead her? Slowly, weakly, she stood up and followed him. Back in the quiet town of Ashford, life moved on, but not without questions. Harper's absence had begun to raise whispers. At first, no one noticed her father had always been unpredictable, and Harper was a quiet girl who rarely drew attention. But when she didn't show up for class on the third consecutive day, her second-grade teacher, Miss Lenny, made a call. "She's never missed this much before," Miss Laney said into the phone, concerned. "And no one's answered my messages." A social worker tried to contact Dale, and eventually he picked up with a groggy voice and slurred words. "She's with her mom," he muttered. "Probably took her without telling me. Not my problem." But there was a problem, and Officer Miguel Ramirez knew it. Ramirez, a steady, thoughtful man in his 40s with 2 daughters of his own, had seen too many cases like this. Something about Dale's tone, the gaps in his story, and the fact that Harper's mother had died 2 years ago in a car accident well known to the local police made red flags shoot up like flares. He drove out to Dale's trailer home the next day, The yard was overgrown. The windows were fogged with grime, and an empty beer can rolled off the porch as he approached. Dale answered the door shirtless, clearly hungover. "Where's Harper?" Ramirez asked, his tone calm but direct. "I told the teacher she's with her mom." "She's deceased." Dale didn't respond. His eyes darted to the side. Ramirez looked over his shoulder. "Mind if I come in?" Dale stepped aside. The inside was worse than expected. Empty beer bottles, cigarette butts, a filthy couch, and no sign of a child. Ramirez spotted Harper's pink sneakers by the door. Too clean. Too new. "You mind telling me the last time you saw your daughter?" Ramirez asked again. Dale rubbed the back of his neck. "Sunday night. She ran off. You know how kids are." Ramirez didn't believe a word. He requested surveillance from nearby gas stations and checked bank activity. One transaction stood out: gas, purchased from a remote pump station 30 miles into the forest. Timestamped at 6:27 p.m. Sunday. Meanwhile, in the woods, Harper stumbled behind Shadow, her small legs shaky. She hadn't eaten since the burger scraps. Shadow walked ahead confidently, tail swaying, occasionally pausing to make sure she was following. After about 20 minutes of slow walking, they arrived at a small structure nearly hidden by brush and vines, an abandoned hunting cabin. Harper's eyes widened. The door creaked open when pushed, revealing dust-covered furniture, rusted cookware, and a cracked window. But to Harper, it was a castle. Shadow walked in and sniffed around. Harper found a dusty blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She coughed, but smiled faintly. She was safe for now. Inside the cabin, Harper explored with curiosity. She found a few cans of food in a dented cabinet, green beans, and a mystery can with the label missing. With shaky hands, she tried opening one, but gave up. Instead, she returned to the broken-down couch and pulled out her notebook again. She drew Shadow with a big heart above his head. Then she drew herself smiling for the first time in days. Back in town, Ramirez put in an official missing child report. The department authorized a search party. Local volunteers, officers, and even high school students combed the woods with dogs and flashlights. Still, Harper was deep in a part of the forest rarely traveled. She didn't hear them. She didn't see the lights. And they didn't know she was alive. But Shadow did, and he was already planning what to do next. Asterisk. Harper woke to the sound of Shadow pacing near the cabin's broken door. His ears twitched, nose in the air. Something was different. The forest wasn't as quiet anymore. There were faint voices in the distance, the subtle crackle of radio static, the low hum of footsteps moving in rhythm. Harper sat up slowly. Still weak, her body heavy like lead. "Shadow?" she whispered. He stopped and looked back at her. His golden eyes locked with hers for a moment, as if he were trying to say something. Then he turned, trotted to the doorway, and disappeared into the brush. Harper's heart clenched. He'd never left her without warning. Outside, Shadow moved fast, nose down, ears pinned back. He could hear them: humans. A search party. Voices cutting through the trees. The scent of boots, dogs, people. He barked once, sharp and loud, hoping someone would notice. Back inside the cabin, Harper clutched her blanket, staring at the empty doorway. Her hands trembled. She was too tired to cry, too tired to call out. Everything inside her was drained. Farther down the trail, Officer Ramirez was walking with 2 local volunteers. They scanned the trees, flashlights bouncing against trunks and mossy stones. His search dog sniffed, but hadn't picked up a strong scent. It had been hours. Suddenly, a bark echoed through the forest, short, insistent, closer than before. Ramirez stopped. "Did you hear that?" One of the volunteers nodded. "Dog. Could be one of ours." Ramirez listened again. Another bark then. Silence. Let's check it out, he said, gripping his flashlight tighter. Shadow darted through the trees like a ghost. He reappeared 20 feet ahead of the group, his eyes catching the beam of a flashlight. One volunteer flinched. "Oh, stray dog," he muttered, but Ramirez stepped forward. "Wait." Shadow didn't run. He barked twice, then turned and ran a few steps up the trail before pausing to look back. When they didn't follow, he repeated it. Bark, run, stop, look. Ramirez narrowed his eyes. "I think, ... he's trying to lead us." The group exchanged glances. "You serious?" "I've seen it before." "Some dogs, ... they know." Ramirez nodded. At the others, "Let's go." Shadow took off at a steady pace, always checking behind him to make sure they were following. The terrain thickened twisting paths, overgrown vines, thorny shrubs, but the group pushed on. Back at the cabin, Harper had fallen into a shallow, cold sleep on the old couch, her small frame curled up tight. Her lips were cracked. Her skin, pale. The air inside the structure was damp and musty, but it was the only thing keeping her from the elements. That then, ... Footsteps. Shadow returned first, bounding into the cabin. He let out a soft whine and licked Harper's hand. She stirred weakly. Then came voices. "Over here." "Oh my God. ... there's a child." Ramirez was the first through the doorway. He froze for half a second, stunned by the sight. Harper, barely conscious, wrapped in a dirty blanket, a mangy stray dog standing guard over her like a knight beside a fallen queen. "Get the med kit," Ramirez called out. He knelt down, his voice soft. "Hey there, sweetheart ... You're okay now. You're safe." Harper's lips moved. "Shadow brought you," she whispered. He nodded, voice shaking. "Yes, he did. He's a hero." Paramedics rushed in, wrapping Harper in warm blankets, checking her vitals, gently lifting her into a stretcher. Shadow tried to follow, whining as they carried her away. The lead medic paused. "Let him come." They made space in the rescue truck for him. Shadow jumped in without hesitation and laid down beside Harper's stretcher as the vehicle pulled away from the woods. Officer Ramirez stared at the path they'd just traveled, still stunned. A stray dog had done what no one else could. He'd brought her home. The hospital waiting room was a swirl of quiet tension and hushed voices. Officers, medical staff, and Elena Ramirez, Officer Ramirez's sister, paced nervously. Harper lay inside the emergency room, hooked to monitors, her frail body wrapped in a soft hospital blanket. She was dehydrated, malnourished, but alive, and she was still clutching the scruffy dog's fur. Shadow refused to leave her side. Outside, the story was breaking and spreading like wildfire. News cameras had caught footage of the rescue, the moment Shadow led the search team through the dense forest to the forgotten cabin. Harper, weak and shaking, had clung to the dog as though he were the only thing keeping her tethered to life. The photo of Harper holding Shadow's rough fur went viral within hours, sparking an outpouring of emotion across social media. Headlines called Shadow a hero. Millions were touched by the image of a lost little girl and a stray dog who refused to abandon her. "I've never seen anything like it," said a local reporter on live television, tears in her eyes. A dog saved a child. Not just saved her, but loved her when no one else would. As donations flooded in from strangers moved by the story, animal shelters and foster homes prepared for Shadow's future. Volunteers offered medical care, new food, and even special training. Inside the hospital, Elena sat beside Harper's bed, holding her small hand. The little girl was quiet, her eyes wide but vacant. She didn't speak much, too overwhelmed by the trauma, but when Shadow's tongue gently licked her cheek, she gave the faintest smile. The bond between them was unbreakable. Meanwhile, police officers gathered evidence against Dale: surveillance footage, inconsistent stories, and eyewitness accounts led to a warrant. When arrested, Dale showed no remorse. He told detectives his actions had been too hard to handle. But the community was unforgiving. Abandoning a child? Ramirez muttered during the interrogation. That's a crime. Dale avoided eye contact. The charges of child endangerment, abandonment, and false reporting quickly followed. The nation was outraged. Editorials condemned his cruelty, and calls for stricter child protection laws grew louder. But for Harper and Shadow, the story was just beginning. Days after the rescue, Harper's condition slowly improved. She began eating small meals and spoke in short sentences. She told Elena about the cabin, the food Shadow found, and the nights spent scared but not alone. Shadow kept me safe, she whispered. He's my best friend. Elena squeezed her hand. And he's here to stay. Harper's caseworker arranged for her to stay with Elena and her husband while the courts sorted out her custody. They welcomed Harper with open arms, their home. Soon filled with laughter and warmth, Shadow, too, found a home. Though he was still recovering from old wounds and malnutrition, he seemed to understand his job was done. He had saved Harper's life, and in doing so, saved himself from a lonely existence. The town of Ashford embraced the pair. Schools held fundraisers for Harper's care. Children sent drawings to the hospital. Strangers left notes of encouragement. On social media, hashtags like #ShadowTheHero and #HarperStrong trended worldwide. In a world often filled with bad news, the story of a father's abandonment and a stray dog's unwavering loyalty reminded everyone of something deeper. That sometimes family is found in the most unexpected places. The weeks that followed Harper's rescue were a whirlwind of hospital visits, therapy sessions, and media attention. Yet beneath the surface, the real healing was just beginning. Elena Ramirez and her husband, David, had opened their home and hearts to Harper. Their 2 daughters, teenagers with busy lives, were quick to embrace their new little sister. But for Harper, trust didn't come easy. The trauma she had endured being abandoned deep in the woods, hungry and scared, left invisible scars that took time to mend. Some days she woke up terrified, looking for her father. Other days she withdrew into silence. But through it all, Shadow was there. The once scruffy stray had blossomed into a loyal companion. The vet had treated his wounds, trimmed his matted fur, and fed him until he was strong again. Shadow's golden eyes still held a glimmer of the hardships he had faced, but now they also shone with a fierce love for Harper. One chilly morning, Harper sat on the porch steps, clutching her notebook, a little treasure trove of drawings she had made since the rescue. There were pictures of the forest, the cabin, and most of all, Shadow drawn with a bright red cape, as if he were a superhero. Elena sat beside her. "You know," she said softly, "you could tell your story someday. Maybe help other kids." Harper looked up, eyes wide. "I think your story is important," Elena continued. "It shows how even when things get really dark, there's always hope." Harper nodded slowly, then smiled faintly. In the therapy room, Harper's counselor helped her put words to the fear and loneliness she'd felt. Harper learned to express herself through art and stories, her confidence growing day by day. Sometimes she spoke about her father, sometimes about Shadow, always about survival. Outside the hospital and social services offices, journalists continued to ask about the little girl and her dog. Harper wasn't ready for interviews, but Elena spoke on her behalf, emphasizing the need for better support for children in troubled homes. Meanwhile, Shadow adjusted to his new life with remarkable ease. He had his favorite spot on the living room rug, loved long walks with Harper, and was surprisingly gentle with Elena's energetic teenage daughters. One evening, as Harper and Shadow lay side by side, she whispered, "You saved me. I'm going. To make sure no one forgets you." Elena smiled through tears. "And you will, sweetheart. Together." Across the country, donations poured in from families wanting to support Harper's care to animal lovers eager to help Shadow. The local animal shelter organized events to raise awareness about stray dogs and the important role they can play in people's lives. Harper's school hosted a Shadow Day where children dressed as their favorite animals and learned about kindness and rescue. Harper attended, holding Shadow's leash proudly. She was becoming a symbol not just of survival, but of courage. Meanwhile, Officer Ramirez continued investigating Harper's past. He discovered the tragic story of Harper's mother, who had died in a car accident, and Dale's descent into addiction. The neglect had been growing for years, but nobody had stepped in soon enough. Determined to change that, Ramirez worked with local officials to improve child welfare programs, pushing for earlier intervention. As Harper's story gained national attention, celebrities and advocates reached out. Some donated to the family, others offered to help with publishing Harper's book, Shadow in the Forest. The idea was Harper's, a simple story of friendship, bravery, and never giving up. Harper was still healing, but she was also becoming a beacon of hope through the darkness. She had found light in the form of a stray dog who refused to leave her side. Shadow had given her more than protection. He had given her a second chance. A year had passed since Harper had been found in the woods, cradled by the dog that saved her. What had started as a tragedy had slowly transformed into something few could have imagined, a movement of healing, hope, and community. Ashford, once just a quiet dot on the map, had become known nationwide for the little girl with the big heart and the dog that refused to abandon her. Harper had grown taller, stronger, and more confident. Her laugh returned bright and ringing. She was thriving in her new home, surrounded by warmth and love. And Shadow, no longer just a nameless stray, had become a local legend. The mayor of Ashford decided to host a public ceremony. The entire town turned out, packed into the small community park, where a stage had been decorated with banners that read, "Thank you, Shadow." Children waved hand-drawn signs. Reporters clustered near the front. Elena stood with Harper and the Ramirez family, beaming with pride. Harper, wearing a yellow sundress and clutching a handwritten speech, stood beside Shadow, who had a blue ribbon tied around his neck and a shiny brushed coat that gleamed in the sun. When the mayor stepped forward, the crowd hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor a hero. Not one with a badge or a cape, but one with 4 legs and the biggest heart we've ever seen." He knelt down and placed a custom-made medal around Shadow's neck. It read, "For loyalty, bravery, and love, Hero of Ashford." The crowd erupted into applause. Shadow's ears perked up at the noise, and his tail wagged excitedly. Then Harper stepped to the microphone. She glanced nervously at the sea of faces, but Elena nodded from the side, and Shadow sat beside her, steady and calm. Harper took a breath. "When I was alone, when I thought no one loved me, Shadow came." Her voice shook a little, but she continued. "He didn't know me. He had nothing, but he stayed. He protected me. He gave me hope." She looked down at him, her voice soft. "I didn't have a family. Then Shadow found me, and because of him, I have one now." More applause. Some people wiped their eyes. Even Officer Ramirez, a rock of composure, cleared his throat and looked away for a moment. After the ceremony, news stations replayed Harper's words again and again. Across the country, people responded not just with sympathy, but with action. Pet adoptions spiked. Programs supporting foster children received donations. Schools began discussing Harper's story in classrooms, emphasizing compassion, courage, and connection. Harper's children's book, Shadow in the Forest, was officially accepted by a major publisher. With the help of Elena and a local illustrator, Harper told the story of a lost girl and the scrappy dog who wouldn't give up. It was simple, honest, and filled with warmth. Pre-orders broke records before it even hit shelves. That night, Harper lay in bed with Shadow beside her, his head resting on her legs. She traced the metal on his collar with her fingers. "Do you think they'll still remember us a year from now?" she asked aloud. Shadow didn't respond with words, but he sighed deeply and nudged her hand with his nose. She giggled and hugged him tightly. "They'll remember you," she whispered. "You're my hero." Outside the bedroom window, fireflies flickered through the dark like stars. The world was still far from perfect. There were still abandoned children, stray dogs, and silent pain in hidden places. But for this little girl and her best friend, hope had taken root, and it was growing strong. 1 year and 6 months after Harper was rescued from the forest, the courtroom echoed with the sound of quiet sniffles and soft gasps. At the front sat Harper, her hair now longer, neatly braided by her foster sister, a pale yellow bow clipped at the end. She wore a simple white dress and clutched Shadow's leash tightly in her lap. Elena and David Ramirez sat beside her, hands intertwined, tears brimming in their eyes. "All paperwork is in order," said the judge, glancing up from the file. "Based on the findings of this court and the recommendations from the Department of Child and Family Services, I'm happy to grant full legal guardianship of Harper Grace Walker to the Ramirez family." A pause. Then the gavel struck once, echoing across the room. "She's officially your daughter." Cheers erupted behind them. Social workers, school staff, even reporters quietly observing the event, smiled and wiped tears. Harper looked up at Elena and David. "I get to stay?" she asked, still needing the words spoken aloud. David leaned down. "Forever." Harper flung her arms around both of them. Then she leaned down and hugged Shadow's neck. The loyal dog, now a healthy 70 pounds of muscle and heart, wagged his tail and licked her face as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Outside the courthouse, cameras clicked and reporters tried to catch a glimpse. But this moment wasn't for headlines. It was for Harper, for Shadow, for the second chance they had found in each other. Later that evening, they returned home to a backyard barbecue, balloons tied to the fence, and a banner hung between 2 trees that read, "Welcome home, Harper." Neighborhood kids played tag while Shadow trotted around proudly, stopping only when Harper sat on the grass with her plate of food. He rested beside her, as he always did. That night, Harper read from her published book, Shadow in the Forest, to her family. Her soft voice grew steadier with each page, telling the story of a little girl who had known until a brave dog walked out of the woods and reminded her that love could find you even in the darkest places. The book had gone on to top children's reading lists across the country. Schools used it to teach empathy and resilience. Children sent Harper letters, some of them sharing their own fears and loneliness, others asking if Shadow liked peanut butter. He did. Harper and Elena made it a weekly tradition to visit the local animal shelter where they read to the dogs. Shadow always came along, laying down beside Harper as if supervising the event. Some of the more nervous dogs seemed to settle just by his presence, as though sensing he had once been one of them, lost, forgotten, and afraid. But now, Shadow had a collar with a tag that read, "Guardian of Harper, Family Forever." One crisp autumn afternoon, Harper stood at the edge of the same forest where it had all started. Her school had arranged a nature walk, and her class gathered for a group photodot as the kids posed. Harper stepped forward and crouched beside Shadow. wrapping her arms around his thick neck. Ready? The teacher asked. Harper smiled. I've been ready for a long time. The camera clicked. The photo would be framed in her new home. A reminder that the forest hadn't been the end of her story. It was the beginning. And as the wind danced through the trees, Harper whispered what had become her quiet promise every night before bed. You saved me, Shadow. I'll never stop telling the world. Shadow nuzzled her gently, tail wagging. He didn't need applause or medals. He had Harper. That was everything. The END